Imagine a time when God's people were trapped in a cycle of oppression, searching desperately for a leader to guide them out of darkness. For years, Israel had fallen into sin, and with each failure, the people found themselves further under the heavy hand of the Canaanites. They were lost, confused, and without a voice of authority until one woman stepped forward. Her name was Deborah. This is the story of the judge who delivered Israel, a tale of courage, faith, and divine leadership in a time when Israel desperately needed a hero. Deborah was no ordinary judge. She was a prophetess, a woman chosen by God to lead his people to freedom. But how could a nation in turmoil trust in a woman to deliver them from oppression? Before we dive into this incredible story of divine intervention and victory, I want to invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to life and share the wisdom of the Bible with more people around the world. So, stay with us as we journey into the ancient world of Israel, a time of great turmoil, great faith, and an even greater deliverance. Let's discover how God used one woman's courage to change the fate of an entire nation. Deborah's story is one of courage, wisdom, and divine calling in an era when Israel faced great turmoil. She lived in a time when the land was divided and oppressed by external forces. The Israelites, having fallen into cycles of idolatry and disobedience, were under the harsh rule of King Jabin of Canaan. His oppressive reign, led by the commander Sisera, forced the Israelites into submission for 20 years. It was into this climate of despair that Deborah emerged, not only as a prophetess, but also as a judge, a rare and significant position for a woman in a male-dominated society. As a prophetess, Deborah's role went beyond merely relaying divine messages. She was recognized as a spiritual leader whose wisdom and connection to God were unparalleled. Her reputation for fairness, insight, and integrity brought many to her for judgment. People came to her for advice, seeking clarity on complex issues that affected their lives and their faith. Under the shade of a palm tree, Deborah would sit, offering counsel to those in need. Her leadership was not defined by force, but by a deep understanding of God's will and an unwavering faith in his power to deliver his people. In addition to her role as a judge, Deborah was a peacemaker. She brought harmony to a fractured Israel, uniting tribes who had become isolated and fragmented. In a patriarchal society that valued men's leadership, Deborah's influence was revolutionary. She was a beacon of hope and a symbol of God's inclusive calling, demonstrating that divine authority and guidance could transcend cultural and gender barriers. Her leadership was not only spiritual, but also strategic, as she was deeply involved in Israel's military endeavors. God's calling for Deborah to act as a deliverer of Israel came at a crucial moment. When the Israelites cried out for help due to their suffering under King Jabin's oppression, God instructed Deborah to send for Barak, a military leader, and command him to assemble an army to confront Sisera and his forces. Deborah's response to God's call was immediate, but it also came with a deep sense of trust in God's plan. She understood that while the task seemed daunting, the outcome was in God's hands. Deborah's relationship with Barak was one of both mutual respect and divine coordination. She delivered God's message to Barak, instructing him to gather an army of 10,000 men from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun. However, Barak hesitated, unsure of whether to move forward without Deborah by his side. Deborah's faith was unshaken, and she assured him that if he went, victory would be granted to him, but the honor of the triumph would go to a woman. This prophecy came to pass when Sisera, the commander of King Jabin's army, was defeated. God caused confusion among Sisera's forces, and they were routed. Sisera fled on foot, only to meet his demise at the hands of Jael, a woman who drove a tent peg through his skull, fulfilling Deborah's prophecy. This victory was a testament to the power of God and to Deborah's obedience to his calling. Deborah's leadership did not end with military success. Her song of praise, recorded in Judges 5, is one of the oldest poems in the Bible, celebrating God's victory and acknowledging the roles played by both men and women in the triumph. In her song, Deborah not only celebrates the bravery of the warriors, but also the courage of women like Jael, who played a pivotal role in Israel's deliverance. The song also reflects Deborah's deep understanding of God's sovereignty and his faithfulness to his people. Deborah's story is an inspiring example of leadership that blends faith, wisdom, courage, and compassion. She stood as a pillar of strength and a voice of divine guidance in a time of great uncertainty. Her willingness to step into the roles of prophetess, judge, and military advisor at God's command is a testimony to her unwavering trust in God's purpose for her life. Through her leadership, Israel found not only deliverance, but also a renewed sense of unity and hope. Barak's reluctance in the face of Deborah's command provides a deeply human moment in a story that is otherwise filled with divine triumph and historical significance. His hesitation was not born of a lack of faith in God's power, but rather from the weight of the responsibility placed on him. In a moment of vulnerability, Barak found himself grappling with doubt, fear, and perhaps even an understanding of the enormous consequences of the mission. The odds were overwhelming. Sisera's army was mighty, and he commanded 900 chariots of iron, a force that had proven nearly unbeatable. The Israelites, in contrast, were underarmed, fragmented, and demoralized by years of oppression. The fear of the unknown, of facing a well-equipped army, was likely gnawing at Barak. His request to have Deborah accompany him reflects a sense of insecurity and a desire for divine confirmation. Barak was not seeking glory for himself. Instead, he was looking for Deborah's presence, someone who had demonstrated a deep and abiding connection with God, someone who had already proven herself as a vessel of divine wisdom and guidance. In Barak's eyes, Deborah was not just a prophetess, she was a tangible symbol of God's promise, the embodiment of his will. In essence, Barak wanted her there to ensure that the victory was secured, to assure him that God's will would be fully realized. This request was not a rejection of God's command, but rather an expression of the vulnerability that comes with leadership, particularly in times of crisis. Deborah's response to Barak's hesitation was both practical and prophetic. "I will surely go with you," she said, providing him with the assurance he needed. But she also spoke a solemn truth that would shape the course of events. She foretold that the victory, though it would come through Barak's leadership, would not be attributed to him. Instead, she declared that the honor of this victory would go to a woman. In a society where men typically held positions of military leadership, this statement was both surprising and profound. It was not just a prediction. It was a statement about the nature of God's will, which often works in unexpected ways. Deborah's words were not a condemnation of Barak, but rather a way of clarifying the roles in God's plan. She understood that while Barak was chosen to lead the army, the ultimate victory was not his to claim. It would be the result of God's divine intervention, and God's intervention would come through an unexpected source. This foreshadowing would later come to pass in the person of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, whose actions would prove pivotal in the downfall of Sisera. Visual depictions of this scene capture Barak's hesitation and the sense of uncertainty that pervades his demeanor. The tension in his face as he speaks to Deborah reflects the weight of his inner conflict, and Deborah's steady assurance provides a stark contrast to his doubt. Her calm, unwavering confidence in God's plan is evident as she prepares to join Barak in the coming battle. The preparations for battle themselves take on a more solemn tone, with the army gathering under Deborah's guidance. The juxtaposition of Barak's doubt and Deborah's certainty highlights the human struggle between faith and fear, a struggle that is timeless and resonates with us all. As Barak, Deborah, and the Israelites prepared for the confrontation with Sisera, the air was thick with anticipation. Barak was still unsure, but Deborah's words had given him the courage to move forward. The Israelites, though lacking the same military might as Sisera's forces, were now united under Deborah's leadership, ready to march into battle with the hope that God would fight for them. It was a turning point not only for Israel, but for the faith of all involved. This battle was not just about military strategy, it was a battle for Israel's survival, a battle of faith, a battle for the future of the nation. In the background, the sound of clashing swords and the steady rhythm of marching feet signaled that the battle was near. But for Barak, Deborah's words echoed louder than any war cry. "The victory will not be yours," she had said, and that prophecy would soon come to pass in ways that no one could have predicted. Deborah's response to Barak's request was a reminder that, while human agency plays a role, ultimate victory rests in God's hands, and that the way God works is often beyond our understanding, using the humble and the unexpected to accomplish His will. This moment of hesitation, followed by divine assurance, serves as a profound lesson in faith. Barak's journey is a reminder that even the greatest leaders are not immune to doubt. But in turning to God and seeking the counsel of a faithful leader like Deborah, he found the courage to move forward. In doing so, he became part of a story that would forever highlight the power of God's intervention, the strength found in unity, and the unexpected ways in which God chooses to bring about His deliverance. The death of Sisera is a striking and unexpected turn of events in the biblical narrative, a moment that showcases the stark contrast between human expectation and divine orchestration. The story of Sisera's final moments is one filled with tension, subtlety, and divine justice, making it one of the most gripping episodes in the entire book of Judges. The events unfold not through the sword of an Israelite warrior, but through the unexpected and courageous actions of a woman who defied the conventions of her time. After the battle at Mount Tabor, where Barak and his army, guided by Deborah's unwavering faith, routed Sisera's forces, the commander of the Canaanite army fled for his life. With his iron chariots destroyed and his troops scattered, Sisera knew that his survival depended on escaping into the wilderness. In his flight, he sought refuge in the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, a man who had made an alliance with King Jabin, the ruler of Canaan. On the surface, Jael's tent should have been a sanctuary for Sisera. She was married to a man who had connections to Sisera's people, and it seemed a logical place for the defeated general to seek asylum. But Jael, though married to Heber, was no ally of Sisera. She understood something that Sisera did not. She recognized the opportunity to fulfill a divine mandate, and she did not hesitate to act on it. When Sisera entered her tent, weary from the battle and the desperate flight, Jael's hospitality was the perfect disguise. She welcomed him with open arms, offering him water to drink, covering him with a blanket to ensure he would rest peacefully. Sisera, convinced that he was safe, let down his guard completely. Exhausted, he lay down and quickly fell into a deep sleep. The tension in Jael's tent was palpable, yet it was masked by the calm appearance of a simple act of kindness. It was at this precise moment that Jael knew what she must do. The silence that fell over the tent was broken only by the soft sounds of Sisera's deep breathing. Jael, standing over the sleeping general, took up a tent peg and a hammer, tools that would have seemed entirely ordinary and mundane in any other circumstance. But in her hands, they became instruments of divine judgment. There was no hesitation in her actions. She knew the weight of the task before her. Jael was not simply acting out of personal vengeance. She was fulfilling the prophecy Deborah had made, that the victory over Sisera would be claimed by a woman, not a man. With one swift motion, Jael drove the tent peg through Sisera's skull, pinning him to the ground. The brutal finality of her action was both shocking and inevitable. Sisera, the powerful commander who had tormented the Israelites for years, was now lying lifeless on the floor of Jael's tent. The very symbol of Canaanite oppression, who had seemed invincible moments before, had been brought low by a woman who acted not out of vengeance, but out of obedience to God's will. Jael's courage in that moment was unparalleled. She did not falter, did not question, but carried out the task God had set before her with resolute determination. The narrative then shifts to Barak, who, after the victory at Mount Tabor, set out in pursuit of Sisera. As Barak approached the tent of Jael, he likely did so with a sense of both anticipation and caution. He knew that Sisera had fled, but he could not have imagined the outcome that awaited him. Barak, having already played his part in the battle, was about to witness the fulfillment of the prophecy that Deborah had uttered. When Barak arrived at Jael's tent, the scene he encountered must have left him in awe and disbelief. Sisera, the once mighty general, lay dead at Jael's feet, a tent peg driven through his skull, his body a silent testimony to God's intervention. Jael did not need to say a word. The reality of what had transpired was evident. Barak's search was over, and the prophecy that Deborah had spoken was now complete. It was not Barak nor any Israelite man who would receive the credit for this victory. It was Jael, the woman of unexpected courage, who had played the decisive role in delivering Israel from oppression. When Barak entered the tent and saw Sisera's body, he was forced to confront the truth of what had happened. The victory had not been secured by his sword, but by the hand of God working through Jael, a woman who, against all expectations, became the unlikely instrument of deliverance. Deborah's prophecy had come to pass in the most dramatic of ways. The fulfillment of this prophecy stands as a powerful reminder that God's ways are often not our ways. He chooses the unexpected and the unlikely to accomplish his purposes, and in doing so, he brings about victories that confound human understanding. Jael's bravery, her refusal to follow the conventional path, and her willingness to act decisively in the face of danger made her the unexpected hero of the story. As Barak stood over Sisera's body, the implications of this victory must have hit him with full force. He had been a part of the military strategy, but the true hero of the story was Jael, a woman whose quiet courage and bold action had ensured Israel's freedom. Deborah's prophecy had not only been fulfilled, it had been fulfilled in the most unexpected and extraordinary way. God had chosen a woman, not a warrior, to deal the final blow to Israel's oppressor. The death of Sisera marked the end of an era of oppression for the Israelites, but it also marked the beginning of a new chapter in Israel's history, one where God's will was carried out through unlikely people in unexpected ways. The courage of Deborah, the faith of Barak, and the unexpected heroism of Jael together highlight the divine orchestration at work in the lives of ordinary people who answer God's call. The fulfillment of Deborah's prophecy was a testament not only to God's power to deliver, but also to his ability to work through anyone, man or woman, leader or layperson, who is willing to stand firm in his purposes. As the dust settled after Sisera's death, the Israelites found themselves free from the oppression they had endured for so long. The land was at peace for 40 years, a period of restoration and renewal. But more than just the physical peace, the story of Jael, Deborah, and Barak would echo through the generations as a powerful reminder that God's ways are far beyond human expectations. The victory, once thought to be impossible, had been won, and it had been won by the hand of God, who often chooses the most unlikely instruments to carry out his will. In the end, Sisera's death was not just a military victory, it was a profound statement of divine justice. The victory was not won by sheer strength or military prowess. It was won by obedience to God's will, by courage in the face of overwhelming odds, and by the willingness to act when called upon, regardless of the consequences. Jael's role in this story serves as a powerful reminder of how God can use anyone, regardless of their background, gender, or status, to bring about his purposes and bring justice to the oppressed. The story of Sisera's death is, at its core, a testimony to the power of God's plan unfolding in unexpected ways, through the lives of those who are willing to trust him completely. The Song of Deborah is one of the most powerful and ancient songs of triumph and praise recorded in Scripture. It serves as both a declaration of victory and a tribute to the faithfulness of God, who had delivered Israel from the oppressive rule of King Jabin and his commander Sisera. This song, found in Judges 5 verses 1 to 31, is not just a narrative of the battle's outcome, but a profound expression of gratitude, reflection, and prophetic declaration. After the intense, life-changing events that had unfolded, Deborah and Barak took the time to lift their voices in unison, giving glory to the one who had orchestrated the victory. The setting of the song was a time of celebration, a time when Israel could finally breathe a sigh of relief after years of oppression. The Israelites had endured years of suffering at the hands of King Jabin and his powerful army, but God had answered their cries. Deborah, with Barak by her side, led the people in singing a song that celebrated God's intervention. The tone of the song was one of deep joy and reverence. It wasn't just a victory over an enemy, it was a restoration of hope, freedom, and peace. Celebrating courage and leadership, the song begins by honoring the leaders, those who had taken a stand for righteousness and answered God's call. Deborah, as the prophetess and judge, is recognized for her bravery and faithfulness. The opening lines acknowledge how, in a time when Israel was without a king and leaders were few, Deborah rose up as a woman of wisdom and courage. The people of Israel, inspired by her leadership, followed her example, rallying together to fight for their freedom. When the princes in Israel take the lead, when the people willingly offer themselves, praise the Lord. Judges 5 verse 2. This line celebrates the voluntary participation of the people in the battle. The victory was not achieved by force, but by willing hearts united in faith. The song acknowledges the leaders, Deborah, Barak, and others, who were not simply military figures, but spiritual beacons guiding Israel back to God. Deborah's role as a judge and prophetess placed her in a unique position to lead with divine wisdom. Her partnership with Barak, who led the army, exemplified the power of collaboration in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. The deliverance of Israel. As the song continues, the lyrics shift to reflect on the deliverance of Israel from the oppressive forces of Sisera and his army. The victory was not just the result of military strategy or might, but the hand of God actively intervening on behalf of his people. In vivid imagery, Deborah and Barak recount how God shook the earth and made the heavens pour rain, turning the battle into a triumph. The river Kishon, which flowed near the battlefield, became a key element in the story. God used its waters to sweep away the enemy's chariots, rendering them useless. In this divine reversal, the mighty Canaanite army, once so feared, was defeated by the power of God's intervention. The mountains quaked before the Lord, the one of Sinai, before the Lord, the God of Israel. Judges 5 verse 5. This passage emphasizes the majesty and power of God. His involvement in the battle was undeniable. It was he who stirred nature itself to fight for Israel. The mountains quaked, the skies poured down rain, and the earth itself seemed to rise up against the enemy. Through all of this, the Israelites were delivered, not through their own strength, but through God's sovereign power. The defeat of the enemy. As the song progresses, there is a powerful shift in focus to the downfall of Sisera, the commander of the enemy forces. The imagery here is both poetic and vivid, describing how Sisera fled the battlefield in defeat, seeking refuge in the tent of Jael, only to meet his untimely death by her hand. The song highlights how God's justice was brought about through an unexpected means. The prophecy spoken by Deborah, that the victory would be attributed to a woman, was fulfilled in the most dramatic and unexpected of ways. The song doesn't shy away from emphasizing the defeat of Israel's enemies with a sense of righteous satisfaction. There is no glorification of violence or revenge, but rather an acknowledgement that God's justice was carried out in his own time and in his own way. The celebration of Jael's role in Sisera's demise is portrayed not as an act of personal vengeance, but as part of God's divine plan for Israel's deliverance. Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Most blessed of tent-dwelling women, Judges 5 verse 24. This line from the song is a striking tribute to Jael's courage and obedience to God's will. Her act of killing Sisera, though violent, was seen as an instrument of divine justice. In a world where women were often overlooked, Jael's bravery and pivotal role in the victory became a symbol of God's use of unexpected people to fulfill his plans. The joy of victory and hope for the future. As the song draws to a close, the tone turns towards hope and restoration. The Israelites had been delivered from oppression, and now they could look forward to a future of peace and prosperity. The song is not just about the past victory, but also about the promise of what God would continue to do for his people. The people of Israel were reminded that this victory was not an isolated event, but a part of a larger narrative of God's faithfulness to his covenant. So, may all your enemies perish, Lord, but may all who love you be like the sun, when it rises in its strength. Judges 5 verse 31. This final line is both a declaration and a prayer. It is a wish for continued victory over Israel's enemies, but more importantly, it is a longing for the people of Israel to remain faithful to God. The sun, which symbolizes light, hope, and vitality, is used as a metaphor for the people of God, shining brightly and full of strength as they walk in his ways. A celebration of God's faithfulness, the Song of Deborah encapsulates more than just a military victory. It is a song that celebrates the sovereignty of God and his unwavering faithfulness to his people. Through vivid imagery and heartfelt praise, it recounts not only the courage and leadership of Deborah and Barak, but also the profound way in which God worked through the most unlikely individuals and circumstances to bring about Israel's deliverance. The song serves as a reminder that God's power is not limited by human expectations and that he can and will use anyone, whether leader or layperson, man or woman, to accomplish his will. In the context of Israel's history, the song stands as both a testimony to God's mighty works and a model for future generations. The people of Israel would sing this song for years to come, not only as a remembrance of their past victory, but also as a call to faithfulness, courage, and trust in the God who had delivered them. And for the generations that followed, it would serve as a declaration that no matter how great the obstacles or how powerful the enemies, God's people can always rest assured that he is in control and his victory will be certain. This song, filled with both joy and reverence, is a beautiful expression of the celebration of God's victory in the lives of his people, an enduring testament to his power and his love for Israel. It is not just a celebration of a battle won, but of a people whose trust in God led them to experience the miraculous. The aftermath of the victory over Sisera marked a turning point in Israel's history, one that brought a period of peace and prosperity that would last for 40 years. This was no small achievement. In the context of the cyclical struggles the Israelites had faced, where they were repeatedly oppressed by neighboring nations due to their disobedience, the long period of peace that followed was nothing short of miraculous. The defeat of Sisera and the leadership of Deborah and Barak not only freed the Israelites from the oppressive rule of King Jabin, but also set the stage for a time of relative tranquility in the land. For 40 years, Israel was free from the tyranny of their enemies, and the people could experience a time of flourishing. Under the protection of God, the Israelites were able to rebuild and strengthen their communities. There were no more foreign invaders to disrupt their lives or put them in bondage. It was a time when the land was allowed to rest, and the Israelites could focus on cultivating their relationship with God and one another. It was also a time for reflection on how God had delivered them in their time of greatest need. The legacy of Deborah and Barak, however, was not just about military victory or political peace. Their story became a pivotal moment in the history of Israel. It was a reminder of God's faithfulness, but also of the powerful role that women could play in the story of God's people. Deborah, as both a prophetess and a judge, demonstrated that leadership and spiritual authority were not bound by gender. In a patriarchal society where women were often marginalized, Deborah's leadership was a bold testimony to the truth that God uses whom he wills, regardless of societal norms. Her role in this victory, alongside Barak's, became an example for generations to come. Deborah not only led Israel in battle, but she also set a precedent for the powerful role of women in God's plan. Through Deborah, God showed that he would raise up leaders from unexpected places, whether from among men or women, if they were willing to obey his call and serve his purposes. Deborah's legacy as a woman of faith, courage, and wisdom became a touchstone for future generations. While she was not the only woman to serve in a significant leadership role in the Bible, her story was particularly influential. Her example opened doors for other women to step into leadership positions, and her role as a prophetess reinforced the importance of spiritual gifts in the life of God's people, irrespective of gender. Her partnership with Barak in the battle against Sisera is often seen as a symbol of mutual cooperation, where both male and female leadership come together to accomplish God's purposes. Deborah's wisdom in counsel, her courage in action, and her unwavering faith in God were qualities that transcended her time and continue to inspire believers today. As the years of peace unfolded, the Israelites were able to experience the blessings of living under God's protection. The fruit of their labor was evident in the peace they enjoyed, a peace that was not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of God's favor. It was a period of restoration, where the people could focus on spiritual renewal, agricultural prosperity, and the growth of their communities. The victory over Sisera and the subsequent reign of peace marked a clear demonstration of God's power to save and his desire to bless his people when they turned to him in faith and obedience. Deborah's leadership left an indelible mark on Israel. In the years that followed, the people would remember her story, recounting how God raised up a woman to deliver them from oppression and to lead them into a time of peace. Her story became a source of hope and inspiration for future generations, proving that in times of great darkness, God can raise up leaders who shine with his wisdom and power. The impact of Deborah's leadership is not confined to the pages of Scripture, but continues to resonate in the lives of those who look to her as a model of courageous faith. Her legacy was not simply a moment in history, but an ongoing call to embrace God's plan for our lives, whatever role he asks us to play. Whether in times of war or peace, Deborah's example reminds us that God's sovereignty and ability to deliver are not limited by our circumstances. He calls each of us, men and women alike, to step out in faith and obedience to fulfill the purpose he has for us. The story of Deborah, Barak, Jael, and the defeat of Sisera offers a rich tapestry of lessons that speak not only to the people of ancient Israel, but to all of us today. These lessons are timeless, showing us how obedience, courage, faith, and trust in God can bring about remarkable transformations, even in the most challenging and uncertain of circumstances. As we reflect on the profound themes that emerge from this narrative, we discover deeper truths that resonate with our own lives, no matter where we are on our spiritual journey. One of the primary lessons from this story is the importance of responding to God's call with obedience, even when the task seems overwhelming or intimidating. Deborah's leadership exemplifies this truth. When God called her to lead Israel as a prophetess and judge, she didn't hesitate. Though she lived in a time when women were rarely seen in positions of power, Deborah embraced her role without question. She knew that God had equipped her for this purpose, and her faith in his plan gave her the courage to step forward, even when it was countercultural and difficult. Barak's hesitation, on the other hand, reveals the natural human instinct to shy away from challenges, especially when the outcome is uncertain. Despite being called to lead the army into battle, Barak wanted reassurance. His request for Deborah's presence reflected his doubts and fear, but it also revealed something deeply human. Even the bravest of leaders sometimes need encouragement to step into God's plan. Deborah's response, "I will surely go with you," Judges 4 verse 9, offered Barak the reassurance he needed, but she also made it clear that the ultimate victory would not come through him, but through God and ultimately through a woman. The story of Barak's hesitation and Deborah's steadfast obedience teaches us that while it is natural to feel fear or uncertainty, obedience to God's calling is crucial. When we step out in faith, trusting that God will guide us, he empowers us to accomplish things we could never achieve on our own. Another powerful lesson from this story is God's ability to use unexpected people and situations to fulfill his divine purpose. Jael, the wife of Heber, plays a pivotal role in the defeat of Sisera, and her actions were instrumental in fulfilling God's prophecy. Jael was not a warrior or a leader in the traditional sense, and yet God chose her to play a crucial part in the defeat of Israel's enemy. Jael's role is surprising and unconventional. She was not an Israelite by birth, nor did she have any formal training as a soldier, Yet God used her courage and quick thinking to strike down Sisera when he sought refuge in her tent. Her willingness to take action in a moment of divine opportunity demonstrates how God can use anyone, regardless of their status, gender, or background, to accomplish His will. This teaches us that God's ways are not our ways, and He can use unexpected vessels to bring about His purposes. Whether we feel qualified for a task or not, God can use our unique position, our skills, and our willingness to bring about His kingdom on earth. It reminds us to stay alert to His leading, knowing that He may call us to serve in ways that seem out of the ordinary. Deborah's leadership, as well as Jael's, highlights the value of courageous leadership, regardless of gender. In a patriarchal society where women were often sidelined, Deborah rose to prominence as a spiritual and political leader, guiding Israel with wisdom, faith, and courage. Her ability to lead both in peace and war underscores the reality that God calls all kinds of leaders, men and women alike, who are willing to follow His lead. Deborah did not allow her gender to limit her. Instead, she embraced her calling and became a powerful force for God's purpose in her time. Jael, too, demonstrated remarkable courage. As a woman living in a time when war was almost exclusively fought by men, she took it upon herself to strike the final blow against Sisera. Jael's act was bold and unexpected, but it served as a reminder that courage does not come from conventional roles or expectations. It comes from listening to God and acting with boldness, no matter who you are or what society expects of you. These examples remind us that leadership is not confined to any one gender or position in society. Whether male or female, leadership that is rooted in God's wisdom, courage, and obedience is powerful. The legacy of Deborah and Jael invites all of us to rise to the call of leadership, stepping into roles where we can make a difference and trusting that God will empower us to lead with courage and integrity. Finally, the entire story is a testament to the importance of trusting in God's timing and His plan. From the initial oppression under King Jabin to the eventual victory, the narrative demonstrates how God works through people, places, and circumstances to bring about His will. Deborah's leadership, Barak's role, and Jael's unexpected act of courage were all part of a greater divine plan that was unfolding in God's perfect timing. Even when the situation looked bleak and the enemy seemed invincible, God had already planned for the deliverance of His people. Trusting in God's timing means recognizing that He is always at work, even when we cannot see the full picture. The Israelites' victory came not just through their efforts, but through God's divine intervention and His ability to use seemingly insignificant people and events for His glory. As we reflect on these key lessons, visual depictions of Deborah in her role as a judge and leader, Barak leading the army, and Jael's courageous act can serve as powerful reminders of what it looks like to live out God's calling. Images of biblical women in leadership, such as Deborah standing under the palm tree offering counsel, or Jael preparing to strike the final blow to Sisera, can inspire us to embrace our own leadership potential. Inspirational quotes such as, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding," Proverbs 3 verse 5, or "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go," Joshua 1 verse 9, can serve as powerful reflections as we contemplate the faith, courage, and obedience of those in this story. Ultimately, the story of Deborah, Barak, and Jael calls us to be faithful in our own lives, trusting that God's calling will not fail and that His plan will unfold perfectly, even when the road ahead seems difficult or unclear. We are reminded that with God's guidance, all things are possible, and that He can use each one of us, regardless of who we are, to bring about His great purposes in the world. As we come to the end of this remarkable story, we are reminded of the incredible journey of faith, courage, and obedience that shaped the destiny of Israel. Deborah, a woman of great wisdom and strength, answered God's call to lead her people in a time of crisis. With unwavering faith, she guided Israel through a difficult and dangerous battle, partnering with Barak, whose eventual courage and obedience led to the defeat of Sisera, the enemy commander. Together, They witnessed the fulfillment of God's promises, and their song of victory became a lasting testament to God's deliverance and power. But the story does not end with the defeat of Sisera. It is the legacy of Deborah's leadership, the courage of Barak, and the unexpected role of Jael that teach us timeless lessons. They show us that God's plans are never confined by our expectations, and that when we trust Him fully, He will use us in ways we cannot foresee. The Israelites were granted peace for 40 years because of their faithfulness and God's deliverance, and this period of peace was a direct result of their obedience to God's will. As we reflect on this story, I encourage you to consider how these themes of faith, courage, and obedience to God's will can apply to your own life. Are there areas where you might be hesitating to step forward, even though you know God is calling you? Are you willing to trust in His plan, even when it seems daunting? Deborah and Barak remind us that God uses both men and women, young and old, in His great purposes, and He empowers those who trust in Him to accomplish the impossible. As we close, I encourage you to take these lessons with you. Reflect on how God might be calling you to act with courage, to trust in His plan, and to step into the roles He has prepared for you. If you found inspiration in Deborah's story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more content that explores the powerful lessons of the Bible. And don't forget to share the story with others, because just as Deborah's victory and leadership inspired a nation, may this story inspire you and those around you in your own faith journey.